Yeah, it's all yours.
Okay. Can you see my screen? It's a yes, right? Okay. Yeah. So we presented the POLTOOLS project and Miss Portal. About the introductions, you already gave it. So yeah. Just to mention that POLTOOLS is part of the SIB initiative. And I will go right into the topic. POLTOOLS, a bit of context. So the meaning behind that, it's assisting behavioral science and evidence-based policymaking using online machine tools. So three main aspects here. So the supporting the behavioral science, the evidence-based policymaking, and the machine tools. Okay, the machine tools is the tricky thing here. And yeah, so this is focusing on developing tools for crisis scenarios in which we need to process content and research and all kinds of knowledge and put it together and make some sense of it, and in order to facilitate decision making. So first of all, I would define a crisis scenario as an unexpected or sometimes expected but not prepared for event that exposes us to some kind of difficulty, danger, or extreme complexity. It is also a point that there should be some decision making and some policy making being done by, for example, governments and all kinds of authorities, like we have experienced these last 2 years. There's also the time variable here. We did trying to beat the clock to put in place all the relevant measures, meaningful measures to facilitate or to ease the situation. And often there are people's lives at risk, or they're directly or indirectly. So when we talk about economies at risk, we are also talking about people's lives at risk. And there's a constantly growing and widespread knowledge in constant evolution. We have partial views of the same events, and studies sometimes they don't match together, and there's a huge amount of heterogeneity here in terms of quality, of format, of source, about all this knowledge. We are talking about research papers, but we are also talking about all kinds of knowledge. So reports, information coming from the journalist world, think tanks, all kinds of information. So this has generated a few needs. We try to think that we can gather them into 3 main points, which are the rapid knowledge access without renouncing to quality. So in order to do good policy making and decision making, we need to we want to have access to this knowledge in some way that we have guarantees about its quality. Knowledge aggregation, so how can we merge, somehow put together and link all this knowledge that makes sense and that provides us a good view of what's happening and which information is already available, and also systems and methodologies to facilitate the policy making itself, based on all the knowledge that we are able to aggregate and link and enrich, and also providing transparency into the process. So this is when the evidence-based policy making comes into play. So we want to know why these policies are being done. Starting from these needs, we identified also the objectives of this project, which is basically facilitate these 3 challenges or needs. Facilitate this knowledge creation, facilitate the knowledge curation, integration aggregation, and also facilitate the rapid evidence-based policy making. As I said, the time pressure is important here. So the point is to do all this in a time window which is relevant for the measures and for the policy making in this crisis situation. So for these three objectives, we identify or we envision three kind of stages. So the first stage, when we talk about rapid knowledge creation, we start from for example, during COVID-19, there are over 100,000 published journal articles, and we are not counting preprints. We are not counting all kinds of seminars, scientific Twitter, scientific Reddit discussions, government reports, and so on. That's all that we call gray literature here. And so one of the points of this process would be to trying to crawl all this together and put this information through pre-processing process through some normalization techniques and enrich this content using all available models and tools which are out there and which are relevant for the case. And in the end, we want also to have some kind of knowledge graphs that we could use for further stages. And for the next, in the next phase, what we call knowledge curation is again, we are combining all the knowledge we can get through crawling all kinds of databases and tools and platforms, and we want to integrate all this knowledge in via some methodology in which there are annotators and experts involved, and we can make sense of all this knowledge. We are able to link and to create this knowledge to create a knowledge base which is useful for this policy making and further cases. And in the end, what we call rapid policy making, so machine assisted rapid open think tanks, what we call science policy sprints. We are also proposing and designing a methodology in which we could gather, for example, a group of experts assisted by these systems and these knowledge bases we are building and designing, and they could identify a certain topic, and they could address this topic having access to all the available information, and also linking all this information and navigating this topic through the most relevant topics within the domain. So all the relevant aspects of this topic in order to have this rapid policy making based on evidence. Among the tools we want to develop here, we already have some kind of sub-tools, some demos, which are basically exploiting all this knowledge base we are generating and we intend to generate, and to have a better view, a wide view of what's happening regarding some specific topic, some specific search, for example. These are two examples. And presenting on the overview, so I think this is important for the rest of the presentation. We kind of envision these three stages, the three stages I presented. So it's the stage one, information collection. Stage two is the enrichment of this information. Stage three are the actual specific uses and the specific support, the final support for this policy making. We like to think that we have these kind of these three stages that could be applied to in an abstract way. So POLTOOLS for us, it's a boilerplate for other projects, other cases, but it's also a kind of architecture. So we will be developing components we will fit into these placeholders here. For example, it's also the idea that from each one of the stages we can derive subproducts which are also meaningful for everyone, for the open science and other projects. And yeah, so for example, from the first stage, from the building of this data set, these data sets could be made publicly available and be used in other projects. From the enrichment and annotation of these of data, we could create data dashboards and interactive tools as the one I showed. And regarding stage 3, we can have this interaction between a group of experts and the machine, and we could have this kind of rapid open think tanks. But these are only a few use cases from about what we could do with this kind of structure. Then I would like to move. This was a brief introduction to POLTOOLS. As I said, it's a boilerplate and it's like an abstract structure and architecture for our projects, and it's also a methodology for us to address these kind of problems. The Myth Portal. Some context for those who are not still familiar with all this topic. Myth Portal is based on the vaccination myths project. There is a reference. There's a paper being right now. I think it's already sent another status of that. But yeah, this paper is ecological taxonomy of anti-vaccination arguments, and basically there are 2 data sets from different domains. So one is the scientific papers, the other one is about it comes from the journalism domain, and the outcome of this paper is a taxonomy for this anti-vaccination argument. So we can see here that there are a set of attitude roots, and attitude roots is our predisposition for a person to not get vaccinated, basically. I have presented here some short examples about, so these are the 11 attitude roots. We start with this information. So first important concept here, the attitude root. And the anti-vaccination taxonomy goes as follows here. So there are arguments. So the arguments are the expressions or the structure, basically composed by 1-2 propositions in which a person expressed the position to get vaccinated. These arguments could be clusterized into themes, concrete themes, and finally there's the attitude root, which is actually the behavioral aspect of the data here. So, for example, here for a person saying, "Why should I avoid being infected?" That has been God's will all the time. So that would be at level of expression, that's what the person says, and then this will cluster into a bunch of other examples very related to this one, very similar to this one, which is the appealing to the natural order of things, and this belongs to religious concerns attitude root. So important concepts here, the attitude root and the theme. Then what's a myth for us? So basically an attitude root and a theme can give us an abstract idea of a myth, and a myth could have different, so the myth object here could have different properties. So one is the affirmation, so the general affirmation for this myth, it's like a summary of the idea. Then we have the attitude root, which is the behavioral component, the theme, and the rebuttal, which is the text which has been elaborated to attack this myth, these arguments. And sometimes there's some specific rebuttal. So it's also interesting to notice here that we have 2 levels. So we could have a general myth with a general rebuttal, and this is defined by the combination of attitude root and theme. But these general myths could have instances, and those are the specific myths and the specific rebuttals. For these specific ones, they are manually being debunked, reviewed and debunked, and there's a set of rebuttals being generated constantly for these myths. So I think the idea of myth is clear. Now I would like to mention the work being done by Luke, who is also in the talk right now. No, feel free to comment if I say something wrong here. So we have implemented some Luke has implemented some classification experiments here as a very, very short, maybe not, I'm not making justice of this, but yeah, we can say that the best results he got for this, sorry, it's 72% of F1 micro average and 48% for the F1 macro average. We can talk about the metrics later. And basically we are trying here to identify for a incoming myth, what's his attitude root. So there's a classification which is based on text, so arguments, and attitude roots, which is the text and the label for this classification. Yeah, why are we doing this? First, it's important to prove that these 11 attitude roots actually make sense. And second, we could go this way to build a classification system for which we can input a text. And we can get the rebuttal for this myth, because in the end we need attitude root and theme to get tracked to the myth, and then the myth gives us the rebuttal for that myth. Okay, so he has implemented this first proof, this first branch of the experiment. The classification for the combination of arguments and themes are still pending. So this is an experiment for us for the future. So just wanted to mention that we have some experiments on this. So the myth portal, finally, now we have all the pieces, all the concepts. The myth portal has come out from the SciB team and in the scope of debunking myths. So basically we are talking here about 4 elements, well, 5 actually, that are in different sites right now, websites and different platforms, but we want to centralize and align all together for the future for these different cases. So first we have, I can explain like that better. Yeah, first we would like to know, we would like to have a tool in which we can see, we could know which are the top 10 current myths on the internet or not, yeah, within a set of internet websites and platforms and so on. Secondly, we would like to have a tool in which I could input a myth and get a rebuttal back. Third, we would like to have all the lists of all the database of debunked myths, which are right now being, so these are the specific myths I mentioned. And 4, some other additional tools, educational tools I will talk more about now. So as I was describing, I will start with 3 and 4 because it's are the components that we are currently working right now. So first of all, we have a wiki. I can actually show very quickly if you don't know it. Within this wiki, there's a subpage in which we have a list of debunked myths, which follow the structure I showed you before, in which we have an affirmation for the myth and we have a rebuttal for that myth. And these are the specific myths. So these myths belong at the same time to specific attitude roots and themes, but these are the specific case. So this is the first component we have here. Secondly, we have point 4, which is the interactive and educational tools. Right now we have this inoculation science, which is a page, maybe Stephen can say more about this later. It's basically a website in which you could get tools and games, and it's a very interactive website to get some education about misinformation and how to deal with misinformation in general. And then we have another side, which is the jigsaw box site, which is this site here, which has a series of features as well, some tools, like for example, there's a right now static database of arguments classified by theme and by category, which here is the root actually. And you could, yeah, someone can search here for different topics, for different arguments, but this is currently static, okay? But just to let you know that this exists. Because now what we want to implement for the future are basically these two components here, top 10 current myths and half myth, one rebuttal. And basically what we want to do here is a process. So I will focus on this one first. So this is the first one. And basically we would like to have within this website, which will be our front end, we would like to have kind of a listener of what's going on in this set of internet sites and platforms about myths. For that, what we intend to do here is we will define this set of websites and platforms to crawl, which we consider potential sources of myths, and we will perform periodically a crawler on this, and using so-called myth classifier that we need to develop here. We would like to have finally a presented graph like this one, This is the idea, the frequency of the myth types we already know. But the important thing here is that for those that we don't know, we could have a process in which there's a human in the loop and could review these low confidence myths and could annotate these myths and reingest it in the general database. And this could be constantly being updated. Why is this relevant? First of all, because the myths on the internet are they are alive, they are not static, they are constantly changing. And this will provide us a good tool to observe the emergence of new myths, basically. And we could improve our system constantly with the new annotations, and we could have all this information available. This would be the first part, top myths. Second part, which is, I think, the most interesting one. We would like to have a system in which we could input a text, a natural language text, which potentially contains a myth. And we would like to get in return which are the potential rebuttals. So let's say the top 3 rebuttals for this input. So for this, it will work we have imagined a traditional search engine in principle, but we need to define still which use cases we are going to develop here, because maybe for one kind of user, it could be a search interface. For another kind of user, it could be a conversational, a chatbot or something like that. But the important thing that we have this data and these components in the backend, and they could be used in different ways. So what we intend to do here again is offer for this input, we would like to classify the input. We would like to mine the information within, and to identify which ones of the specific myths and rebuttals are good candidates for this input. When no specific myth can be matched, or the confidence is low, we can go for the general. The other way here is incomplete. Sorry. We can go for the general myths and general rebuttals. So the principle is always the more specific, the better. And we can use the static data we already have. We can use as well the constantly being updated database that we mentioned before for the first component. So we could have a centralized database for all these myths, and it could evolve in time. Yeah. So the relationship between POLTOOLS and Myth Portal, as I said, for us, POLTOOLS is like the boilerplate and general abstract architecture, we envision for this kind of use cases. And derived from this myth portal case, we could, for example, for more general cases, include all these components which are going to be developed here in the different stages. So we could include these data sets, these databases. We could include a myth classifier as one more enrichment component within this stage. We could extend our crawler based on these myths. And the idea is that this POLTOOLS project will grow as long as there are new cases, new matching cases that could fit into this kind of architecture. At the same time, we are addressing the myth portal project also with some kind of structure, like as in our POLTOOLS boilerplate. So because in the end, we are also having a pipeline for crawling here, which is generating a raw data set. This raw data set is getting updated and reviewed and enriched in a second stage. And in the end, from the stage 3, we can derive many specific cases and many use cases, as I mentioned. So this information and backend will be available for all kinds of tools like search engines and chatbots and so on. And I think that was all. Thanks for your attention and questions. Oh, sorry, I'm not
yeah, so I see that Luke has a question.
Thank you for the talk. That was really interesting and cool. I think it's yeah, that's very interesting for the future. But I have like a couple questions. So it sounds like a lot of what you're doing is kind of data set creation, or like you're very like scraping data and putting data together, and then you need a lot of people to annotate it, or you need experts to annotate it, or maybe you do some sort of semi-supervised annotation that's been confirmed by annotators or something. But I'm wondering, like, have you like looked into the ethical or the privacy or like licensing concerns with like scraping like YouTube or Twitter or Reddit data? Because that's becoming a bigger and bigger problem, especially in Germany, creating data sets from social media where there's a lot of ethics concerns about violating people's like privacy or their ability to opt out of being in the data set.
Yeah, it's something that we need to, so all this is, so all I presented, almost all is projection for the project, and this is one of the tricky points actually. We need to make sure that we are doing compliant things here, and we kind of started thinking of workarounds about this, because in the end, for example, if we can crawl Twitter data, but we are not allowed to store it, for example, we
publish it, yeah.
Publish it. We could somehow generate synthetic data, for example, based on the first one, in order to trying to keep the same content, but not having actually the original content. But it's something that we need to discuss. And if you have any information about this, yeah, well, happy to.
So when I first like started my PhD, I was really interested in data set creation, but everyone was telling me, especially in natural language processing, everyone's saying, oh, you don't want to make data sets in natural language processing, especially in Germany. It's, if you get anything close to realistic, you're going to get hit with ethics complaints or privacy complaints or licensing complaints. Yeah. So yeah, that's one issue that I see, but I think it's really ambitious and interesting. One thing that you mentioned though is that the system would input like natural text. And that's cool. But one thing I think would also be cool is a multimodal system where you don't necessarily have to put in text. You could put in a video, or you could input, for example, like an anti-vaxxer meme, where you have picture data and then text data that's in the meme. And that's something that I think would be a really cool addition to a system like this, where we can have some sort of multimodal analysis instead of just textual analysis, for example.
Yeah, it's something we were trying to define the scopes, and I think you were part of the conversation where we talked about starting with tweets, right? But yeah, so the idea is that we should be able to distinguish here between different kinds of inputs, because even among the text inputs, we need to distinguish. So part of the system will work when it's a tweet. We need some different pre-processings if it's a scientific paper and this and that.
Right.
Different models will be used, but we didn't think so far about videos, for example, but it's definitely something that could be considered. So yeah, that's cool. Yeah,
especially in like artificial intelligence and natural language processing, there's less and less people are becoming less and less interested in just one stream of input, but multiple channels of input instead. So that's just something I think would be really cool if I could input like an anti-vaxxer meme and someone would say, oh, this is conspiracy ideation, and here's a myth to rebuttal this. Yeah. But anyway, I thought that's really ambitious, and I think it would be a really cool system.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's very ambitious, and maybe for the scope of a PhD, the whole thing end to end with all the possibilities is too much. But we try to have this kind of MVP thinking that we would like to have maybe a couple of cases running all the way through, and something that could be extended in the future. Or, I mean, we could liberate all these components at some point and make some open science here.
Just as a brief comment on this, on the second part, I think that's really interesting about the multimodal part. I think would be indeed great to just kind of think about where it would fit, but I agree with Ezequiel that it wouldn't be the first thing to do, but to make sure that in principle the architecture could be extended in that way. And I think it's especially interesting for the crawling part, actually, much more than the user interaction, because more and more stuff, let's say on Telegram, happens on audio messages. So in principle, if you want to find new vaccination myths, in principle would be extremely interesting if you could also monitor audio. But then again, that is maybe, I don't know, it's even more problematic for privacy reasons. And I don't know what the state of the art is in terms of data minimization on that part. But but it's really interesting.
Michael.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ezequiel. Really interesting and ambitious project. So really looking forward to your results in a couple of years, or hopefully a couple of months. I was mainly thinking about what the next step might be in this project. I mean, I think it's really great to gather all these myths and all these rebuttals and sort of the psychological roots of it. But I came across an idea that I think Stefan, Steve, and others also suggested for another grant proposal, which is sort of linking these myths or techniques to different psychological characteristics to sort of then figure out like what certain myths certain people are most vulnerable to. Because, I mean, if you then think further, then you could, I don't know, if you have this sort of vulnerability matrix where on one axis you have sort of these personality traits, and on the other matrix, the sort of myths, then you could, more specifically target people with different rebuttals or more generally interventions. I mean, this is sort of just sort of the next step after you've gathered those myths and rebuttals. And I think it might not be just right up your alley because you have a different focus, but I was just wondering if you have generally thought about this or if you think that would be something that could be viable.
Yes. Thanks. So regarding the next steps, we are now entering the phase of building the system. So the half myth, one rebuttal, focusing on limited scope, maybe for tweets at the beginning. And the idea would be that, for example, for healthcare professionals, so this, I didn't mention that, it's very important. They could have this kind of tool when they receive patients and they don't have right now any easy way to retrieve these rebuttals or to think of these rebuttals, right? So this would be the first, let's say, in terms of effort and results and relevance of the system. And I think this would be the immediate next step, develop this system and this tool. Then maybe we can think of some experiments in which to measure how the use of these tools are improving this trust and the information from patients, for example, or how this is facilitating this process, this interaction in time between healthcare professional and patient. Yeah. On the other hand, we have a main workflow with the general POLTOOLS approach, apart from the myth portal, and we are trying to think about the use cases for the final, this so-called open think tank or rapid think tank is assisted by machine. We are now trying to define which are interesting and relevant scenarios for that. So how would in such a scenario of hybrid collective intelligence, how this would work? So how would a group of experts interact with a system regarding one topic? How should the navigation of this information be? So we are trying to define this, because in the end, actually the final stage 3 for POLTOOLS, I think it's, let's say, the final ultimate product, but at the same time, we want to make meaningful and useful all the mid steps we are taking, but yeah, there's a huge component of behavioral science within this stage 3 of the ultimate use cases for the whole architecture. And yeah, about your idea of linking myths, yes, it's something that maybe we need to explore, because right now for us, technically speaking, they are only labels for our texts, and we need to explore a bit more how this is connected, or if there's any kind of internal structure for these myths and roots and themes, because right now, one thing we don't know, for example, is if there's a kind of hierarchical structure for these roots, for example. So we need to look into that as well.
Yeah, I mean, just pushing you a bit further, I mean, there's current work by Almog, Steve, and others on like how you can extract psychological or personality traits from digital trace data. And you could really think about rolling this out at a really large scale. Like if you can actually extract those personality traits and then have this vulnerability matrix, then you could, I don't know, specifically target people with debunks on social media. But yeah, maybe that's a debate for another day. But yeah, thanks.
Well, yeah, thanks, Michael. Just, I can connect to that by saying that, yeah, Angelo and Dawn and I already have data on that to some extent. And we just found that these 11 roots are actually identifiable as factors in a task where people had to rate something like 60 something myths for their for how much they agreed with them, so their impact. And the factor structure confirms our root analysis as a first approximation, subject to Angelo having to do a lot more analyses, but it looks pretty good. Now, we don't, correct me if I'm wrong, Dawn and Angelo, I don't think we had any personality measures for this. Did we have any covariates at all? I think we kept it really short, didn't we?
Yeah, this was just asking people how much they agree with each of 66 arguments. We didn't measure any predictors at this point.
Yeah, okay. Now, but then the next question that I need to raise, given what other projects I'm involved in, is how ethical would it be to use, inferred personality characteristics of a person to then customize rebuttals or whatever, or doing something to effectively manipulate them in a sense. Now, of course, we're not Cambridge Analytica, but we've published a few papers saying that they were the bad guys. So we have to be a little bit careful, I think, at all times about how we do that. Now, I think a lot can be achieved by being transparent about it and just tell people, hey, by the way, we can customize this so it makes you whatever, you have a better conversation with the machine. If we customize it, if you don't want it, we can turn it off. There's stuff we can do, but I do want to make sure we don't forget about these considerations.
Stefan?
That's a very interesting discussion, and getting back to Michael's point. So I think what Michael was referring to are these misinformation strategies that I think, I'm not sure actually who collected them, but I know that Steve and Sander van der Linden and others talk a lot about them in their projects and are thinking about particular inoculation strategies. So for example, I don't know, fake experts, appeal to emotion, I can't remember them all, but, and I think what Michael was referring to is to say, or see, okay, are people differentially susceptible to these strategies? And if so, how would we be able to tell, and could that be put to use? And I think the analogy here in the myth domain here is kind of these misinformation strategies. I'm not sure what role they play, and I'd be interested to hear Steve and others' thoughts on that, how appeal to fake experts and these kind of things play into the myth part. But at the moment, I think that the attitude roots is kind of what the susceptibility is about. And as Steve just mentioned, apparently there are new results that show that people apparently can be modeled according to these factors. And so for the use case of I have a myth and I need a rebuttal, in some sense, identifying the susceptibility is not a necessary task. That has already happened, right? So if a patient comes to a health professional with a myth, then that's already the thing that they are worried about, and now they need a rebuttal, right? So in that sense, there is no need for matching or differential susceptibility. But going forward, I agree with Michael that it's interesting to explore, I don't know, what further use cases could be done by the myth database or myth project portal more generally in use cases where this matching of people to a susceptibility or an attitude root has not yet happened, right? Where you just want to expose people to the most relevant stuff, maybe preemptively in a kind of a pre-bunking inoculation kind of approach. And then I also wanted to ask Steve whether you could comment on, or Dawn and Angela, on this. I'm not sure whether it's the same study or another study where you also were looking at how people are persuaded or convinced by particular rebuttals. Because I think one idea that, or at least one idea that we were thinking about was, is there a way to see, kind of what kind of rebuttals are particularly effective, and what would that mean for such a system? But I'm not sure, maybe I'm making this up now.
No, I think you're right. I mean, first of all, we haven't done it. That question is easy to answer. I do think that we are, however, planning on doing stuff like that. Dawn, do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Well, I mean, we are planning studies that are looking at the sort of what's more effective when you present information to people. Some techniques we can use, for example, soliciting their explanations, refuting specific arguments. But it's an interest, actually, your question, Stefan, seems to be more of which rebuttals are more effective, which sounds like you're asking, comparing two different types of rebuttals. And I'm not entirely sure what you asked about there.
Okay, and I mean, what I can say is, number one, that there's a recent paper just came out, I'm on it, with Brian Swire as first author, where we looked at lots of different formats of a rebuttal, not differentiating between different people, but just, the format of the rebuttal. And we found that it actually doesn't make much of a difference. I think that came out in CREEPY, Cognitive Research, Practical Implications, whatever it's called. And so as a first approximation, there wasn't a big effect. And that has been replicated by somebody else, although I can't remember who at the moment. And then the sort of basic idea of customizing rebuttals is part of ProDem Info. I mean, that's what the project is based on. Not personality, but people's ontology of the truth. We want to customize rebuttals based on what people consider to be true, whether it's evidence or whether it's just their feeling, for example. Are they stuck in a populist ontology of truth or an evidence-based ontology? So we're definitely working on that. That's the major part of that project. And we have some very interesting data, which I think Fabio will sooner or later tell us about already on tracking these slightly different conceptions of honesty, not truth, but it's, you know, highly related in political discourse in the United States. So that's just foreshadowing that. Almo.
Yeah, so it's interesting how this discussion developed, and I think that what you and Stefan touched upon is basically the differentiation between well, when we have the attitude towards the message, or if you want to have a congruent rebuttal or something, this deals with the attitude you hold towards what's being rebutted. But when you just mentioned the different ontologies that the truth ontologies different have, well, this is and I'm just thinking out loud, and this is a lot of, it deals with a lot of different persuasion theories and the different approaches that you can tackle arguments. And when we
sorry,
so if this would be something that more of
I got to interrupt you. Sorry, you were gone there, I think, for about 10 seconds. What does this relate to? You talked about ontology, then you related to something that sounded really interesting, and you cut out. So I don't know what you said. Oh.
Yeah, I don't think I have, my connection is not super strong, so I'll try to make it brief. I'm just saying that we're talking about different, basically this with persuasion and with theories of persuasion and how you can deal with different levels of the message itself, whether this addresses like more peripheral ideas of the message, or how you would reframe it to be more persuasive to the individual. Whereas when we talk about personalities, we talk about the individual characteristics of the person, psychological characteristics of individuals, when this could be effective, and when it's matched, when we match the content to the characteristics of individuals. So this is just to putting it out there. So these are different things when you have the attitude, you have the let's say how the context of how you frame it. These are different things, and also the characteristics of the individual. So it's there's a lot of space here to explore, and this is just an interesting idea. Angela?
Yeah. Yeah, one interesting thing we found recently is that there's not a big overlapping between the kind of roots that are usually analyzed in the academic literature and the roots that are more prevalent in the general population, in particular in the British population. And one of those roots is actually epistemic relativism, which seems to be very prevalent among vaccine anti-vaxxers or vaccine hesitant people. And that's why I would love to know more about your data, Fabio, and your work with these true ontologies and different kind of relativism. I think that's very interesting. And regarding personality, I think in the second study of our empirical validation of the taxonomy, we are planning to use external criteria to validate the construct validity of these factors or roots. And personality, I think, is not the most suitable option for us because we want to choose very specific predictors, for example, general conspiracy mentality to validate conspirational arguments, anti-vaccination conspirational arguments, right? But I think personality could be very useful regarding how debunking works and how effective it is, because I can imagine that it is a strong mediator or moderator of the effect. So that is something very interesting and worth to be analyzed in the future, I think. Not only personality, these general theories like moral foundations or social actions could also be very useful. Not as predictors, but as moderators, right?
All right. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Just briefly, Dawn asked about what I was referring to, and I think I realized that one way to frame this is to say, if you correctly identify the attitude root of a myth that somebody voices or some speech act, then that's already what you need to do. So in some sense, just saying vaccines are great, okay, that's like not a very helpful rebuttal, or maybe not super helpful. But if you can tailor your rebuttal to what the myth is that the person is holding their head, then it's going to be more effective. I mean, maybe that's just painfully obvious, but that's the point, right? So that's maybe the kind of personalization that you want, right? It should just be as specific as possible rebuttal. And then in that sense, personality doesn't play much a role here, or other covariates beyond maybe possibly finding ways linguistically or otherwise to frame the same rebuttal, how specific it is, in a more convincing way. And or to the extent that personality might be correlated with particular kind of attitude roots. So I don't know, for example, whether, I don't know, a personality predicts, which kind of personality predicts epistemic relativism at all, if at all. But of course, at some point, if you want to have a text-based model that predicts vulnerabilities, then you might as well try to build a model that predicts epistemic relativism, and you don't need any detour. Yeah.
Well, just one quick comment on that. I mean, reactance, which is one of our roots, is actually, I would consider that to be a personality attribute. I mean, there is such thing as trait reactance. People who just refuse to be told what to do, if you ask them to turn off the light, they will turn it on, because they just can't handle being told what to do. I think that's a personality attribute, and we already know that is actually in Britain that was the most persuasive argument that our British sample of vaccine skeptics, to put it mildly, that they chose. Just don't tell me what to do. That's yes, precisely, yes.
But yeah, on Stefan's point, it is actually, I think it makes sense in that it's actually harder to try and find someone's personality out rather than just deal with what they're saying to you, if what they're saying is reflective of why they're against vaccines. So not having to route through, okay, well, we need to know about this person's personality might be good if you can just identify based on the argument how to then counter that. It sort of like skips a step.
Yeah, and if at all, then I was just thinking, because Michael, Steve, and I and others are trying to find methods to inoculate people against this kind of personality-based framing matching of messages, like this Mats paper, where you have, for example, ads for cosmetics that were either framed as in an extroverted or introverted way, and they show that it's more effective for women of that personality. But that's, I mean, very different, because in some sense, the cosmetic product in itself doesn't tell you, it's very generic. It's more like the analogy would be to find out what kind of product would you need to market to the person. So kind of more like the basic market segmentation. And then you can think about how to frame it. And here's the same thing. It's like, oh, what myth does the person need to get out of their head, and not generically appealing to vaccine there. And I agree with Don, if you, I suspect that you can probably get 80% of what you can achieve by just being relevant in your debunking. And then you might put some stuff on top, but that might actually have strong diminishing returns.
I think that there are many potential ways to frame rebuttals. One of them is, for example, the tone, right? It's not the same to express a conspiracy theory, with some kind of a reflection, that express it very emotionally with a lot of insults. I mean, that probably needs to be reframed. I mean, it needs a different frame, right? How to address that specific argument. But yes, personality.
To what you appeal to, as Steve said, do you appeal to evidence or do you appeal to feelings, depending on your ontology? And I think that's, Steve, just last time I talked to Sharon Porciello, she was saying that that's also a big topic in the field she's going along, about tailoring the messaging to different people. And it's if you work with people who don't know anything about science, then it's maybe hard to appeal to evidence, and you need different things. So I think that's a very relevant part to explore. And I think we've all now repeatedly referred to Fabio, and so maybe we should just give him the floor so that he can tell a bit about. I'm dying to know more about that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I don't know when we. I mean, Fabio and I are finishing
next week. We want Fabio next week.
And we
actually, that might be too soon. We are under the gun to finish a report by the end of the month, and I think after that, Almok, didn't we talk about that already? Do we have a slot for Fabio? No.
We have a slot for Fabio. We didn't talk about it, so Fabio, I'll contact you.
Maybe you can give us a teaser, just a teaser.
No, we actually we are collecting data. What we've seen is in political text as well. Belief speaking seems with on a chronological timeline to go up. So the more we are, the more we approach the present, the more tweets we have with words like believe, feel, and so on when compared to the past. So, and this is something. So this is a trend we are observing, but it's just very, very, very early to say more about that.
Okay, I think it's time for us to wrap up. Anyone has something you want to address before we wrap it up? In that case, so Ezequiel, thank you so much for your talk, and thank you everyone for the great discussion. And we will see you hopefully next week.
With Gordon Brown, he's visiting from Warwick.